Oh boy, team preview number 17. Yeah, it's the end of the East region in our team previews because today we're going to take a look at Shanghai Dragons. So, Shanghai Dragons, oh boy, what a team. And they have quite the story, don't they? They were our inaugural season heartbreak, the 0-40 Shanghai Dragons, the team that couldn't win. And in 2019, they said no. We will win matches, and they ended up with a 13-15 record, middle of the league-ish, 11th. And then they were like, you know what? We are not done. Our redemption arc will be complete. They won a stage during that 2019 season, but in 2020 they said no, and they came top of the standings. Quite the redemption arc. The only team to have been bottom and top of the league at some point. So Shanghai Dragons, they only lost 2 matches last season in the regular season. They ended up slipping up in the playoffs though, not in the playoffs, in the grand finals. So they didn't get to the overall grand finals. That was Seoul and Philadelphia. And Seoul and Philadelphia, sorry Philly fans. Seoul and San Francisco Shock, I should say. But they were massively improved, and it's been massive. It's been a massive turnaround of this whole Shanghai org at the end of the day. And they are completely different to what they were originally. But they are not finished, and therefore they still want an Overwatch League title, and so they've made a few little changes in order to try and get that title. And will it get them there? We don't know. But there are significant changes for Shanghai this season. A lot of changes in terms of getting rid of a lot of dead wood and things like that. But yeah, we'll see what happens with this Shanghai squad. So let's take a look at the coaching to start off with. We do see that they let go of their player coach Quartermain. That's not too much of a surprise because, again, they're going to cut down slightly, but they still do have a very chunky coaching staff. They still have Moon as their head coach, and then Dongsu, Jaephil, and Kong as their assistant coaches. They've still got one of the biggest coaching teams in the league. Like, that is something Shanghai can always boast about. There's not many that have bigger coaches, if any, that have bigger coaching staff, a bigger amount of coaching staff available to them than the Shanghai Dragons do. So, that's pretty stacked. But moving on to their players, and this is where things get a little spicy. So, we see that they end up letting Dia go. They don't utilize Dia all that much, so it's not too much of a surprise. He was on a 2-way for them, but he's now gone fully over to Team CC, I believe. And yeah, I mean, he's always got a route back if he's at Team CC, which is great for Dia. But yeah, it's not too much of a surprise to see him go. We see Guguri go. Again, Guguri wasn't really utilized by Shanghai Dragons, and at the moment, especially with the way things are in the world, you don't want money just being wasted on bench players. You want money that's basically going to give you something in return, and really Guguri wasn't giving that for Seoul Dynasty because they have Void. So she ends up leaving and she doesn't have a team anymore, which means we have lost our only female influence in terms of players in the Overwatch League, which is unfortunate, I'm not going to lie, but hopefully that changes soon. Then we have the DM situation. That's a weird one, we'll go over that one in a minute. Then we have Ding again. Ding was a good player, but he's not going to start over the likes of Fletter and people like that. So again, he's just not going to get utilized by Shanghai. He's not necessarily a bad player, it's just that Shanghai are too good. Ding could go to another team in the league and probably find a place. But he hasn't, unfortunately, so that's a big sad. Then Luffy. Again, this is a weird one. They did actually utilize Luffy for a bit last season, but I like Luffy. He's more consistent. He's not necessarily as spectacular. That's probably the best word. He's not as pop-off as Izayaki can be, but Izayaki, in my opinion, is much more inconsistent than Luffy. So it's a give and take. They have replaced him, so yeah, it's a little bit of a weird one. But the next one caught you off guard big time, I'm sure. So this is Fearless. Fearless left Shanghai Dragons to go to Dallas Fuel. Now, that's obviously the pull of Dallas Fuel, money, and the coaching of Rush, etc., and the Element Mystic lot. It's, yeah, that's a rough one. Like, Fearless was one of the best main tanks in the league last year. He does have certain meta issues. His ball isn't great, but mostly he is a fantastic main tank. And that's a lot of presence that Shanghai have to fill, although they haven't done really too much bad of a job of that, because they've also let go of their other main tank. This is Stand 1. He moves over to the Boston Uprising. Again, that's not a massive loss for Shanghai, because I don't think Stand 1 was good enough to fill the shoes of Fearless. So instead they've had to kind of dip into the transfer market and find someone. But I think that's a better option for them. And instead of having 2 main tanks and swapping them, which they did at times last season, they're going to have 1 main tank and just stick with it. Which again, I think is a better way of doing things. So I actually prefer the newer approach from the Shanghai Dragons rather than the last season approach, even if it does offset some completely star-studded tank play for some more consistently good main tank play. I think it is a better thing to do, and then hopefully your supports in DPS should pick up the slack slightly. Okay, so let's move on to the new roster then. So they're retaining Izayaki. That's a spicy one. Izayaki he's great at his heights, but also I think can have some interesting lows at times with interesting ult usage and such. We saw it last season, but Izayaki, if he can be more consistent, I think will be really, really good in terms of flex support. And that's why kind of I raised the whole Luffy issue, but he does have a rival for that position that we're talking about later on. I think that's important for Izayaki, otherwise I think he would kind of slacken off a bit, so I like that. They were obviously retaining MVP from last season, Flatter. That's not too much of a surprise. Flatter's insane and really versatile. So yeah, I don't think anyone's surprised that he's sticking around. And then Lip will be alongside him. Lip's one of the best Sombras around and one of the best DPS players around. Lip really, really pushed through last season, and he will be a major, major part of this Shanghai Dragons side. That's not going to be changing anytime soon. That's for sure. And you know, with this DPS, even those two alone, it makes Shanghai incredibly versatile. So yeah, Shanghai have got great DPS players. What's new? Then we see Void in the off-tank obviously returning. Again, Void, one of the best off-tanks from last season. Again, no arguments for that. Like, why would you change Void? There is literally no need to change Void. And instead, they've kind of doubled down on him. And instead of having a backup off-tank, they've just said, well, Void is Void, and Void will be our off-tank, and we don't need a backup. And so they just kind of got rid of Gaguri. And that's not really a bad thing. I think keeping their tank line stable is a good thing, actually, for Shanghai, and I think it will benefit them this season. And then moving on, the main support will remain as Li Gon. Li Gon, I like Li Gon. I always have liked Li Gon. He had some interesting showings at times during the playoffs and grand finals last season, but most of the time Li Gon is good. I don't think he's the best main support in the league, but he is one of the best main supports in the league. I think Li Gon heavily depends on a good flex support partner, and I think at times that was slightly inconsistent last season. When Li Gon was partnered with Gangnam Jin back in the Runaway days, it was like a phenomenal pairing. It was one of the best support duos in the world, in my opinion. And Li Gon still has the ability to be one of the best main supports around. So I think it's still a great retain from the Shanghai Dragons. I don't think they needed to change anything there. So now we move into the signings, and the replacement main tank is going to be Fate, coming in from the Florida Mayhem. Now, Fate, he's very consistent, Fate. I like Fate in that respect. He's not consistently like top tier, although with Moon coaching him, which is preferable for Fate, he could turn into a consistently good top tier main tank. And I think that's what Shanghai are looking at here, with him being a replacement for Fearless. Fate is more versatile, and I think it's a good signing. I expected different, but I think it's a good signing. And he should work. And from what we've seen recently in the Next Cup, etc., it is working. So I think Fate will be good for the Shanghai Dragons. I don't think he's going to have the highest of highs like Fearless did, but I think he's going to be by far good enough. And I think that's all Shanghai Dragons need, because they've got a stacked roster wherever you look. So yeah. Then we have Erster coming in as a DPS player. Erster, he comes in for Atlanta Reign. Erster, he's going to be mostly a squad player this season because I think almost certainly the starting DPS lane will be Fletter and Lip. But Erster, he brings in good Genji and stuff like that, but Erster, he had a rough season last season, but I'm not going to put that down to his own mechanical and player-wise fault. I think that was more of the coaching at Atlanta Reign being just lackluster. And Erster, the season before, 2019, was actually really good for Atlanta Reign. So, yeah, I think Erster still has a lot of potential in him, and I think he could realize that at the Shanghai Dragons, and I think that's why they've kind of picked him up. I think a lot of people sort of dismissed Erster in the transfer window because, well, he was mediocre last season, but I don't think that was necessarily his fault. I don't think he had the right coaching behind him, and at Shanghai, I think he will be much, much better. However, he won't get probably too much time to show that because, it's Fletter and Lip. So, then we have the replacement flex support to challenge Izayaki. This is the only Chinese influence in Shanghai. This will be Molly, coming in from Chengdu Hunters. And Molly, again, looked great for Chengdu. And I like this pickup because it, sorry for the pun, but it panders to the Chinese audience. And, yeah, it still keeps that little bit of home in for Shanghai. Because otherwise, Dia was the only Chinese representative for Shanghai last year. Still have that Chinese representation, which I think is good. And Molly is still a great flex support. Is he as good as Izayaki right now? Probably not. Is he more consistent than Izayaki? Debatable. Molly would have to work his way into the Shanghai Dragons starting lineup, which is going to take a while and going to be difficult. But I'm willing to see if he can do it. I think that will be super interesting. And then the last one is DM, because DM was let go and then re-signed by Shanghai for some reason 2 months later. DM, one of the best raw mechanical players in the league, like in terms of hit scan Widowmaker sort of thing. There's a reason why he wins the Widowmaker duels. Like, he is, raw hit scan wise, one of the most talented players around. He can suffer when it comes to playing in in-game scenarios. I think that's more because he is heavily reliant on his aim. Like, in Widow 1v1s, he's godly. In actual team-based scenarios, it kind of gets offset a little bit. DM is still a fantastic arsenal, a piece of the arsenal to have for Shanghai, because he's just so cracked on hitscan. He's just so cracked. So he's going to be a massive part to have, and if we went into a really hard Widow meta or something like that, I think DM would play, and DM would play instead of Lip. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Spicy roster for the Shanghai Dragons, and it will do well. Like, inevitably, it will do well. This is still a fantastic roster. It hasn't changed too much. If anything, it's a little bit more versatile with Fate on the main tank, because Fearless was a little bit whoopsie on the Hammond. But yeah, I think he's much more. I think this is a much more consistent roster, and I think it will be a roster that's there or thereabouts come the end of the season. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't. Now, talking to the season, let's look at their first 6 fixtures. They've got it actually pretty good. I mean, Shanghai should have it pretty good because they should be able to beat pretty much anyone in APAC. Well, anyone in the East, actually, in fact, because they could be the best team in the East. They could be. It's not necessarily nailed down that they will be, but they could be. So first of all, they will take on Guangzhou Charge. They've already beaten them in the off-season. Again, in the next cup, I would expect them to beat them again. If Shanghai can get a 3-0 here, that'll be very impressive, because I think Guangzhou have the ability to take maps off of people. They're going to be one of those weird teams that get some surprise maps here and there. Maybe even some surprise wins because they're an up-and-comer. But I think Shanghai should still win that one. Then they go up against Chengdu in the second match of the season. That's going to be closer, I think. Chengdu have a lot of versatility, a lot of very skilled Chinese players. Chengdu, again, a little bit of a dark horse, but I still think Shanghai should have too much to for the Chengdu Hunters right now. I don't think Chengdu will be quite in the place to beat Shanghai, but they could make it really close. Then Hangzhou Spark in the third match of the season. Hangzhou, again, have a lot of versatility, a lot of skill, but I just think this Shanghai squad just has too much. It just has too much for that Hangzhou Spark squad. Shanghai could be taken quite close by Hangzhou, but I would still expect Shanghai to come out on top. I don't expect Shanghai to lose a game in their first 6 matches of the season, I'll be honest, because their 4th match of the season will be against New York Excelsior. Again, I would expect them, very similarly to Guangzhou Charge, to beat them. And if they can 3-0 Excelsior, that will be actually really impressive. Because Excelsior, again, another one of those teams that I expect to take odd maps off of people and be a little bit of an oddball at times. So, yeah, I think Shanghai should go 4-0 and straight into the May Melee as possibly top seeds. But we never know. So, you know, there could be a weird win in there for Chengdu or Hangzhou maybe. Then, moving on to the fifth match of the season, this is in the lead up to the June Joust, they'll take on the Chengdu Hunters again. Again, similar story, however, hero pools will be in effect here. So that could have a little bit of an influence, but when we look at hero pools with Shanghai, they should be able to adapt to whatever the hero pools throws at them, right? They have a really, really versatile off-tank that can play anything he needs to. They've got a really, really versatile main tank that can play anything he needs to. The supports are versatile enough, and they have DPS players coming out of their ears. So they really don't need... They shouldn't be faltering in a meta. They can play Sombra, they can play Tracer, they can play Widow, they can play Hitscan, they can play Projectile. They've got no problems. They've got no standout weaknesses. Apart from perhaps Izzy and a little bit of consistency issues. That's all I would say. So, again, I would expect Shanghai to win that even in a hero pool meta. And then, last of the 6 games, the 6th game of the season will be Hangzhou Spark again, and again, similar story. I'd expect them to win it even in a hero pool because of their versatility and their sheer amount of skill on the Shanghai Dragons roster. But that rounds us out for Shanghai Dragons. That also rounds us out for the East region previews. We will be moving back to the West region next time. I think it's Toronto next, which is going to be a spicy one, and it's the last 3 actually. So yeah, Toronto, Vancouver, and Washington. That's the next 3. And then we'll be going into power rankings and stuff like that. The season is not that far away. And we're also getting stuff about casters now and stuff like that, which is, yeah, interesting. Anyway, the socials are linked in the video description as per usual for Illusion Gaming and myself. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.